Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the call of the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
President, my understanding that we're in morning business and I have 10 minutes allocated to me. I may not take that much time. I'm here to essentially support the hard work of a colleague, Senator Johanns, in bringing to the floor for a vote tomorrow a repeal of the 1099 provisions in the current health care bill. As I campaigned throughout the state of Indiana over this past year, meeting with business people, individuals running, whether it's a small shop in a small town or a large business on the outskirts of a busy manufacturing center, several themes were repeated over and over and over. One was that we continue to have problems of creating jobs because of the massive amount of regulations that are flowing out of Washington that at a time of fiscal downturn in particular are keeping our business from going forward and hiring people, being competitive. We spend time in the back room with paperwork filling out what seem to be unnecessary burdens imposed upon us by the regulatory agencies in our compliance with that. Now, some of these regulations are necessary. We all know that for purposes of health and safety, there are regulations that are important and keeping companies' feet to the fire in terms of making sure that their workplace is a safe and healthy place to work. These are important, and there are others. But clearly there is an excess, and what I heard people saying all across the state of Indiana was that our government has grown too big, it spends too much money, and it overregulates. And particularly when it comes to business, that overregulation and overtaxation is impeding our ability to compete on a worldwide basis, to provide the kind of jobs and services that America is used to providing in such a successful way. Tomorrow this vote will deal with an aspect of the health care bill that was passed in the last Congress. Tucked away in that health care bill is a provision requiring every company, every church, every charity to submit a separate IRS 1099 form for taxes when detailing and describing the goods that they purchase in order to run their church, run their hospital, run their business, run their charity. I've talked to hospitals, small and rural, big and large, across the state of Indiana, and they said, do you realize how many separate items that we purchase every year of over $600? Do you understand how many hundreds, if not thousands, of prescription drugs we purchase in order to have available here to perform our services in this hospital? How many Band-Aids, how many cotton patches, how many sophisticated drugs, and hundreds of thousands of items are purchased by large companies every year. And each one of those then now has to be calculated as to whether or not the purchase price was more than $600 for the lot that they buy, and it has to be detailed and then sent to Washington. Mr. President, there are not enough bureaucrats in Washington to begin to process the paperwork that would flood into this city. There are not enough buildings in this city to house those bureaucrats processing those forms. There are not enough warehouses in this city to store the forms that would flow in here. All for what reason? Because the IRS supposedly, this is a way to collect more taxes on companies that have not submitted forms that they've actually purchased this particular material, even though they are required in the tax laws to honestly, and I believe in the almost unanimous, maybe 99% of the time, do just that. So it is a solution without a problem. And clearly what Senator Johanns has been attempting to do over the last several months and even in the last Congress is to bring forward a bill which would repeal this onerous provision of the health care law. U.S. Chamber of Commerce said this about the 1099 reporting requirement, and I quote, "At a time when they can least afford it, entities will have to institute new complex record-keeping, data collection, and reporting requirements to track every purchase by vendor and payment method. This provision," they said, "will dramatically increase accounting costs and could expose businesses to costly and unjustified audits by the IRS. Mr. President, even the IRS Information Reporting Program Advisory Committee has ruled against this, deeming this mandate burdensome with no measurable purpose. Forcing businesses to spend time in the back room to fill out all these forms and do all this record keeping, and particularly those small businesses that don't have the back room, where the owner and the proprietor of the business is the one that has to fill out these forms instead of being out there to sell his services or run his business. Those are particularly burdened by this unnecessary regulation. Clearly, if we want to promote our businesses and hire more people and get more people back to work, we have to release them from the burden of unnecessary regulation, and I would also add to that taxation. So tomorrow, when this vote comes up, let's pass the Johanns Amendment to repeal this unnecessary and costly provision and send it to the White House for the President's signature. And while we're at it, Mr. President, let's also continue to take a look at the health care bill. Because if this provision somehow survived the scrutiny before passage, there must be many more of these in there. And let me just mention one of them that directly impacts my state. Medical device companies are a key industry in the state of Indiana. In fact, we're one of the leading states, if not the leading state, in the country for the number of people engaged in producing medical devices. That industry was slapped with a 2.6% sales tax on medical devices under the new health care law, simply as a means, as a pay-for the new health care law provisions. Now, this is an innovative industry, an industry which is at the cutting edge of technology, which is one of our best exporting industries as they sell all over the world. We talk about the loss of American capacity to manufacture. We have skilled workforce in place with thousands of people employed throughout the state of Indiana, several hundred companies producing medical devices. They've developed the innovation and the skill to be the best in the world. And yet, just out of the blue, because we were looking for a pay-for in the health care bill, it had nothing to do with their production of that product or their business, they were slapped with this $20 billion impact tax, a 2.6% sales tax, which turns out to be about $20 billion under the health care law. I've given these statistics for just one state in Indiana. I know Minnesota and a number of other states also are engaged in the medical device business. But singling out, though, the medical device manufacturers to help pay for the massive costs of this law, the health care law, it hinders job growth and stifles innovation. This is a resource-rich, research-rich industry in America that needs to be encouraged, not discouraged, that needs to have incentives to go forward, not disincentives, that doesn't need more regulation and higher taxes, but needs to be seen as the production of a product which is the best in the world and what the world wants to buy. So as we look at the health care bill, I'm sure there are many provisions that need to be addressed. I, of course, am on record for repealing and starting over for reasons that I've stated before and won't go into too much detail now. I think it is fatally flawed. I think starting over would give us a far more cost-effective, incremental improvement in ways to address our health care needs in this country without breaking the bank. Nevertheless, if we can't do that, we need to keep looking at situations that we're going to be addressing tomorrow, the 1099 repeal, and situations that I've just described, the medical device tax. Mr. President, with that, I will close out here, urging my colleagues to come and vote for the repeal of the 1099 provision that has been brought forward by Senator Johanns. And with that, I note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
President?
Senator from Indiana.
Mr. President, once again, I ask that the call of the quorum be initiated.
Without objection.
Mr. President, it just occurred to me, it should have occurred earlier during my talk, but maybe it's better to address this, and since no one else is on the floor at the time seeking to be recognized, occurred to me that the President sitting in the chair, presiding officer of the Senate, represents the state of Connecticut, and I represent the state of Indiana, and the two of us are the only ones here on the floor of the Senate at this particular time. But you and I have something very much that's going to draw our attention this evening, and that is the final game of the NCAA basketball tournament, Connecticut versus Butler. Now, I could extol the virtues of Butler for a long, long time and take some advantage of you because you're in the chair and you can't reply. But I won't do that. Just here to say we have a friendly bet on for this. I've got some good Indiana-produced goodies coming your way should Connecticut prevail, and I think you have some good Connecticut-produced goodies coming my way. I mean, by goodies, I mean popcorn, a can of beans, or whatever your state is famous for producing. I didn't want anybody to get the wrong impression there of what we possibly are exchanging here. Butler has been just a dream and a joy for those of us from Indiana and hopefully from across the country to watch this small school, 4,400 students in Indianapolis, produce a team that has made, comes out of a mid-major conference, names of schools that perhaps aren't familiar to very many people, but yet they've knocked off the giants. And with one more giant, I might say, to face this evening. But this little Midwestern school plays basketball the Hoosier way, and that is an incredible collection of players that were not recruited by the big schools, but came together and worked together as a team under the inspired leadership of their young coach, and have now found themselves in the NCAA finals 2 years in a row. I think something no one would have predicted, particularly after they lost their star player last year who left school a year early to go to the NBA. My best wishes to you, Mr. President, for your team, and as much as I give you those best wishes, I'm looking forward tomorrow to receiving your part of the bargain delivered to my office. But if not, I'll be standing at your front door. It's already assembled just in case. But we're rooting for a great game tonight, and I think probably one of the most exciting things that happens in sports is the amateur basketball tournament that's played by our NCAA colleges. It's a joy to watch these young men. And then tomorrow, I might just mention, the Notre Dame women's team will be playing in the finals against Texas A&M. And so Indiana is certainly putting forth some of its best in these next 2 nights, and looking forward to seeing that game tonight. Our hopes are that we will not be in Senate this evening, in session this evening in the Senate. I don't think we will be. So you and I will be, unfortunately not in Houston, but in front of a big screen TV cheering on our teams. With that, Mr. President, I note the absence of quorum.
Thank you, Senator. The clerk.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Alabama.
All be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we're in the middle of a budget debate, and as ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, it's something that's very, and I believe to America. Got two aspects of it. One is how will we finish this fiscal year that ends September 30th. The House Republicans have sent over legislation that funds the government, but it's $61 billion less than was expected or had been projected under last year's budget. I don't think anyone would be surprised that after the last election and the big spenders took a pretty big hit, that there would be a reduction after the continuing resolution of, I guess, 5 months expired. And since that expired a few weeks ago, and we've had some short-term continuing resolutions, we've reduced spending by about $10 billion. And I truly believe that we need to move it on down to the full $61 billion. And over 10 years, that will reduce the baseline by $61 billion, and fairly computed, it will save in a 10-year time frame alone $860 billion. This is close to $1 trillion. It's real money, and it is a significant step that we should take. I hope this Congress will. The next matter that's before us is what about next year's budget? We should already be in that cycle. The President has submitted the budget he's required by law to submit to the Congress. It does nothing about the threat to our country economically and financially. It's a great disappointment. The most irresponsible budget ever submitted, I am confident, by any president in the history of the American Republic. I've said that before, and I truly believe it. It is irresponsible. We cannot adopt it, will not adopt it, and it will not become law. But our Senate has indicated that they're prepared to consider, Democrats too, a better budget, perhaps. But we haven't seen it. It's not been brought forth to the Budget Committee as law requires us to so far, and we're behind schedule. But the House tomorrow will consider a historic budget that honestly and carefully confronts the challenges facing us, long-term and short-term, dealing with entitlements without gimmicks, and allows us to begin to focus on what the challenges are and why we have to take these steps. Because who wants to talk about cutting spending? What politician likes to do that? It's not something we really like to do. Why are we talking about this? Why? Can it just be put off? Is it just political squabbling between Republicans and Democrats? They're always bickering. Is this what it's all about? Is there anything real here? Do we have a problem that's can't be avoided? Is it something, can't we just continue like we are? Why do we have to worry about more reduction in spending? Now, that's the question. That's the question. Do we have a real crisis? Are we facing a threat to our economic well-being that could throw this country into another recession, maybe even a depression? Surely, hopefully not. A fiscal, financial crisis? Is that possible? Well, let's talk about a couple of things. Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, recently stated that our national debt is the greatest threat to our national security. That's a pretty strong statement. Secretary of State Clinton has said something very similar. Is that true? The American people pretty clearly agree with Admiral Mullen by a huge margin. They say we are on the wrong track. You are mismanaging Washington. There was a shellacking of the big spenders in the last election. People know we're spending too much money. We've had a 24% increase in spending in the last, since President Obama's been president. 24% increase in discretionary, non-defense spending. What's the inflation rate been? 2%, 1% during this time? We had 24% increase. And next year's budget proposed by the President calls for 11% increase in education, 10.5% increase in State Department, 9.5% increase in the Energy Department, 61% increase in transportation and high-speed rail. What? And inflation rate's 2%, and we got 5 times, 50 times nearly that amount of spending increases. So, but alarmingly, it's not just the American people. It's not just Tea Party, great American people who are concerned about their country. It's not just Tea Party's members that are expressing concern and calling for action. It is the nation's top financial experts. This is what's important. And they're calling for action sooner rather than later. Erskine Bowles, President Obama's choice to head the Deficit Commission. He was also President Clinton's chief of staff and a very successful businessman himself. Was chosen by President Obama to head the Debt Commission along with Alan Simpson, the former Republican senator. And in a written statement they submitted to the Budget Committee just, 2 weeks ago, this is what they said, a formal written statement from the Debt Commission co-chairman to the Budget Committee of the United States Senate. Quote, "This is the most predictable financial crisis this nation has ever faced." Close quote. Predictable crisis. In other words, you can see it coming. They spent months doing research on all of this. They heard from all kinds of witnesses. When asked when the crisis might occur, which could involve some sort of double-dip recessions or even a longer recession or higher unemployment, when this kind of debt crisis, economic crisis could occur, Mr. Bowles said 2 years, maybe sooner, maybe later. Alan Simpson said it could be a year, within a year. These are stark warnings, and the same message is coming from a host of the world's top financial experts. Now, the good news, I got to say, the good news is that our country's strong work ethic and entrepreneurial spirit still exist, and the indications are that despite the economic drag on our huge debt burden, the economy, far slower than normal, recovering from this recession, is struggling to rebound. If we act decisively now, ending our wasteful spending habits, we can be confident that progress and growth will continue. When a nation's leaders are aware that their country is facing a crisis, they have no higher moral responsibility than to act to protect the nation from that danger. Today's Wall Street Journal has an op-ed by the Nobel Prize laureate Gary Becker, former Secretary of Treasury George Shultz, and economics professor John Taylor. The article embraces the $61 billion in reduced spending passed by the House and debunks the critics unequivocally who call these cuts extreme. They directly and categorically assert these spending reductions will not result in higher job losses and explain why that's a false view. But again, is the debate over spending just another Republican and Democratic squabble? Is it just an attempt to gain political advantage, sound and fury signifying nothing? The answer is a resounding no. We are spending money we don't have in amounts dramatically greater than at any time in our history. When this fiscal year ends, September 30th, we will have spent $3.7 trillion and taken in only $2.2 trillion. 40 cents of every dollar we spend this year will be borrowed. We have to borrow the money we don't have. This will be the largest of 3 consecutive deficits exceeding $1 trillion. President Bush was rightly condemned for his $450 billion deficit one year, the highest he ever had. We've been over $1 trillion the last 3 years. And next year's budget deficit is expected to exceed $1 trillion. This money must be borrowed and interest paid. Nothing comes from nothing. Last year, the nation's total interest payment was $200 billion. That's how much we paid on the money we borrowed. For perspective, the Federal Highway Program, Senator Inhofe knows about, is about $40 billion. We spent $200 billion on interest. We'd like to have spent more on highways. Federal education programs cost about $70 billion. So already the interest on our debt is the fastest growing expense of our government and is crowding out spending for other programs. But hold your hat. Our current trajectory takes us at increasing speed on our road, as the former head of the European Union said. He described it as the road about the United States, the road to financial hell. According to the official score or analysis of the President's 10-year budget, the total debt of America will more than double from $13 trillion to $27 trillion over the 10-year period, and our annual interest will increase from $200 billion last year to $940 billion. That's how much interest we'll be paying in the 10th year under the budget. It will cost more than education, highways, energy, State Department combined. Indeed, our interest payments will surge past defense, Medicare, Medicaid. That's why expert after expert, witness after witness, Republicans and Democrats say the United States is on an unsustainable path. Yet, President Obama's budget increases all spending every year, including discretionary spending, doubling the debt of the United States again, all the while raising taxes by almost $2 trillion. It makes no proposals to put Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security on sound footing. Nothing. Creates a debt path where his lowest annual deficit in 10 years is $748 billion. That's the best year. And with his out-year deficits increasing so that by the 10th year, his budget is scored as having a deficit of $1.2 trillion. Is that unsustainable or not? Is it extreme to say we've got to change that course? That we can't continue it? Well, let me quote a few experts, not just Jeff Sessions, senator from Alabama. How about some people whose lives have been enmeshed in the debt of America? They seem to share the concerns, it seems to me, of the extremists. You know, the Tea Party people, they're extremists. Well, what do the experts say? How about Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve? This is what he said. I think that the type of budget agreement that was put together by Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles is a type of budget that will be passed by Congress. It doesn't look like that's so, unfortunately. He goes on to say, the only question is, will it be before or after the bond market crisis? Close quote. Is Alan Greenspan extreme? He said also a few weeks ago that we could have a debt crisis in our country in 2 to 3 years. Bill Gross, who has the world's largest bond fund at Pacific Management, eliminated government-related debt from his flagship fund. They no longer have any United States Treasury bonds. This was what he wrote very recently. If the USA were a corporation, then it would probably have a negative net worth of $35 to $40 trillion. Once our, quote, assets were properly accounted for, no lender would lend to such a corporation. Is Bill Gross extreme? Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson said, quote, we believe that if we do not take decisive action, our nation faces the most predictable economic crisis in its history. And Mr. Bowles, before the Budget Committee, March 8th, asked how and when that might happen by Senator Conrad, our chairman. Quote, the problem is going to happen. It is a problem we're going to have to face up to in maybe 2 years, maybe less, maybe a little more. Alan Simpson said, I think the crisis could come before 2 years. Secretary of Treasury Geithner, President Obama's Secretary of Treasury, when asked about the Reinhart-Rogoff study, which said when debt reaches 90% of GDP, the economy of a nation slows down noticeably. They'll be testifying before the committee tomorrow, Rogoff and Reinhart, I believe it's tomorrow. When asked about their analysis that 90%, when your debt equals 90% of your gross domestic product, your economy is slowed and then pulled down, and we're already at 95% heading to 100% by September 30th, Mr. Geithner said it was an excellent study. He didn't debunk it. He didn't say this is an extreme study. He said in some ways it understates the risk, because it is not just that countries that live with very high debt to GDP ratios are consigned to weaker growth. They're consigned to the damage that comes from periodic financial crises as well. Is Secretary Geithner extreme? Admiral Mullen, is he extreme? Senator Conrad, our Democratic chairman, is very concerned about the trajectory we're on. And in March 15th at the Budget Committee hearing, this is what he said, quote, I believe our nation is in peril. We are hurtling toward a fiscal cliff. We are clearly on an unsustainable course, close quote. Pete Domenici, who was part of the Rivlin-Domenici Commission, Debt Commission, Senator of the Bowles-Simpson Commission, former chairman of the Budget Committee in the Senate, said, I've never been more worried for my country. Are Senator Conrad and Senator Domenici extreme? I think not. Only 3 bodies can propose spending plans. The White House budget has been submitted. It would double our debt, surge our interest burden, increase spending at every level, and raise taxes substantially. Now we will tomorrow have the House plan. It will be released by Budget Chairman Ryan. It is the most serious attempt ever made to solve America's spending and debt problems while saving critical programs such as Medicare. Saving those programs. They're heading to default now. What does the Senate plan to do? The Democrat Senate. Doing nothing seems to be what the plan is. We haven't seen a budget proposal and haven't had any hearings set to mark up a budget proposal. I doubt that the President's plan will be brought forward in its present form because it would receive not many Democratic votes and I suspect no Republican votes. So I don't know what we are, but I would just say the Senate's got to do something. We have to propose a budget. We have to be engaged in the process. We can't stick our head in the sand. We cannot be in denial. Is the President going to change? Is he going to now all of a sudden take responsibility for the fact that we may be heading to a fiscal crisis that could surge unemployment, surge interest rates, place this nation in financial risk? We haven't seen it yet. And if he doesn't act, what will our Senate Democratic colleagues do? I call on them to step up, to represent their constituents, to do the right thing. We've got to do the right thing. We can't continue on this. We cannot continue on this course. So in my view, American leaders have no higher duty, no greater moral responsibility than to take all appropriate steps to protect the good people we serve from a clear and present danger, a danger that's been detailed to us with clarity and repetition by some of America's finest leaders. I thank the Chair and will yield the floor.
Senator from Oklahoma.
First, let me say how refreshing it is to hear the senator from Alabama, as scary as it is, tell the truth about the problem that we have. When I tell people back in my state of Oklahoma that I refresh their memories, and I remember in 1996 standing at this podium right here, and that was when the Clinton budget came out for the fiscal year 1996, and it was a $1.5 trillion budget, and I said a $1.5 trillion budget is impossible to sustain. And yet the budget that the senator from Alabama is talking about was the budget of this president, and of course with his majority in the House and the Senate, that actually has a deficit that is greater than the entire budget to run the entire United States of America in 1996. And that's the deficit. That's what my 20 kids and grandkids are going to have to pay for. And when you stop and use the statements that are real, that can't be denied, and that is that this president, just in the 2 years he's been here, has increased the debt more than all presidents before him, from George Washington to George W. Bush. It's not believable, and that's what makes it so difficult, because people think, how can this possibly be? And yet it is. That is the reality of it. A few minutes ago, I talked at some length about a very significant amendment that's going to be coming up, and that is to take the jurisdiction away from the Environmental Protection Agency, having to do with the cap and trade, something that they were unable to do legislatively, and they're going to try to do through regulations in the Environmental Protection Agency. So I've already talked about that, but there's something that has not been mentioned on the floor of this Senate that I think is very significant, and it's surprisingly enough, I say, Mr. President, hardly anyone is even aware that it's going on, and that is, we're all concerned. We hear every day about the atrocities that are committed in Libya, and about the people that are being mowed down. And what they don't realize is that's not the only place this is going on. I have to share, as much as I hate to do it, because I'm disagreeing with our State Department when I say this, but I have to say it because somebody has to say it. Right now, the potential of having large numbers of people tortured, murdered in Cote d'Ivoire is taking place. And let me just say, kind of set the stage here so that people will be aware of it. I've had occasion to be in Cote d'Ivoire. Cote d'Ivoire, some people call it the Ivory Coast. It's in West Africa. It's an area where a lot of the slave trade came from, that came to this country. It's a place that has been led by a president named Laurent Gbagbo for the last, the last 10 years. I first became acquainted with the country back before he was president of Cote d'Ivoire. In fact, his wife, Simone, who is now his wife, was not his wife at that time, and she was a member of Parliament. And so I kind of sat through what happened in 2002 when there was a real effort primarily by one individual, his name is Alassane Ouattara, from the northern part of Cote d'Ivoire, charging against him. Now, it's kind of interesting because Cote d'Ivoire is one country, but up in the north, you have primarily the Muslim area, in the south and east, primarily the Christian element. And so there's been a real effort for quite some time for the chosen one up there, who's Alassane Ouattara, to defeat President Gbagbo. Now, here's the problem that we have. There was an election that took place a few months ago when it appeared that that Ouattara actually beat the incumbent president, President Gbagbo. And so we were all concerned about this in terms of, was it a straight election? And I'm going to tell you in a couple of minutes here why it was not, but also tried to call this to the attention of the administration. Right after, way back in January, after the election took place, I wrote a letter to Secretary Clinton, and I said, I'd like to have you reevaluate. I'm going to have that letter as, at the conclusion of my remarks as a part of my statement to be printed in the record. But to look at this and evaluate this as to what actually went on in that election and how it was rigged. Ouattara tried to deny the involvement in a mass slaughter that took place just a couple of days ago. That was in a town called Dukway. Dukway was in a town in the southern part of an area that was very strongly in favor of President Gbagbo. And somewhere between 300 and 1,000 people in that western town of Dukway were slaughtered, were with guns and with machetes. And Mr. Ouattara and his people tried to deny their involvement in the mass slaughter, but the forces took place in the town days earlier, and the Gbagbo forces were not even near the town. They had left the town a week before this happened. And so, don't believe me, but The Guardian, which is a British newspaper, reported last night, just last night, they said, and I'm going to quote now from the newspaper, it said, the UN mission said traditional hunters known as Dozos fought alongside Ouattara's forces and took part in killing 330 people in the western town of Dukway. The International Committee for the Red Cross said at least 800 people were killed in the violence, and I'm still quoting from the newspaper, last week. What we don't know is that 800 plus the 330, so roughly it's 1,000. Guillaume Haifa, who's the deputy head of the Human Rights Division of the United Nations mission in Ivory Coast, blamed 220 of the deaths on the pro-Ouattara forces. The full article goes into a lot of detail. Also, the British Broadcasting BBC reporter at Dukway wrote in the last 24 hours that I spot 4 pigs eating something dark in a charred courtyard standing by a newly dug mass grave. A UN soldier from Morocco is choking with rage and grief. I ask him if any of the dead are children. He nods and begins to sob quietly into his face mask. I repeat, the massacre was not caused by the Gbagbo forces, but by the Ouattara forces who had taken over the town. President Gbagbo has called for a ceasefire repeatedly. I repeat that. He's called for a ceasefire, but the Ouattara forces have rejected it. Why? This massacre could have been avoided if the Ouattara had accepted mediation through the African Union. On March the 27th, the African Union sent former Cape Verde Foreign Minister Jose Brito to mediate between Ouattara and Gbagbo. Gbagbo accepted mediation, Ouattara did not. I've been following the events closely in Cote d'Ivoire since last fall and have spoken with various African dignitaries. I'm convinced that there is a serious question as to whether Ouattara is the legitimately elected president of Cote d'Ivoire. I've received substantial evidence of massive voter fraud in the rebel-held north of Cote d'Ivoire. That's the area from which Ouattara comes. And I've sent the evidence to the Secretary of Clinton on 2 occasions spanning the last few months. One of them is where we actually have the evidence of the number of votes that were stolen. In one letter, I pointed out, this is the last letter, which I'll make a part of this record, to the evidence which shows that Ouattara received 94,873 votes that were listed on a tally sheet for one of the 5 regions in the rebel-held north, times this by 4, and it comes to very close to the margin of victory that allegedly President Gbagbo lost. That's 400,000 votes. So if indeed a similar amount of voter fraud exists in these 4 regions, Gbagbo is the actual winner of the November 28th presidential election. But if that's too complicated, look at it this way. In those 5 regions, they don't call them precincts up there. Well, some of the small ones they call precincts, so it's a little confusing. But in the first letter that I sent in, I commented that Gbagbo, during what we would call the primary, had won thousands of votes in each one of those 5 precincts up north. However, in the primary runoff, he got 0. And I suggest to you, Mr. President, that is a statistical impossibility. You can't get 0, particularly after you've already had thousands of votes. Now, my letter to Secretary Clinton, I called for the United States to support new elections there, but thus far these efforts have received an inadequate response. Based on the news that Ouattara has murdered some 1,000 people in Duquay, I hope that the U.S. will reconsider its position and call for a new election. This Wednesday, April 6th, will mark the 17th anniversary of the 1994 Rwanda genocide. I went back for the anniversary of that genocide. I've been there many times before. We know that the UN Secretary General Kofi Annan and others knew the extent of this violence early on but did nothing to do it. Well, now we know there could be another genocide occurring, and we do know in advance. And that's why the United States is going to have to call for an immediate ceasefire to prevent Ouattara and his rebel army from committing a mass slaughter of the Ivorians, especially the many youth with sticks and baseball bats who are protecting President Gbagbo at the present time around the presidential palace. You've got to get this mental picture. You've got these kids, young kids, who are marching around. They don't have any weapons. They're carrying baseball bats and 2x4s. And I've also been told that within the last half hour, that the United Nations helicopters, UN peacekeeping helicopters, are firing on Gbagbo's military camp, causing massive explosions. Now, there could be some confusion on this, because 2 of the articles that came out in the last half hour, one of them was talking about the French, who are kind of behind in supporting, of course, Ouattara, that they are involved in this. The other says the UN. I'm not sure. One of the 2 is. Lastly, I've sent a letter to Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman John Kerry. And by the way, I talked to him personally about this. He is very concerned about it. I've requested that he convene a hearing as soon as possible into the atrocities committed by forces loyal to the rebel leader Ouattara, as well as into what I believe were flawed elections that gave legitimacy to his claim of the presidency. So I do ask unanimous consent that now, at the conclusion of these remarks, placed in the record immediately following my comments would be the 2 letters sent to Secretary Clinton, along with a letter sent to Senator Kerry, and with the calculation of the miscalculation of the election that I honestly, in my heart, believe was stolen. This is what we're asking to be put in the record. This is the tabulations of the precincts. And you add up the precincts, in just one precinct, there was a mistake of over 85,000 votes just in one precinct. So I ask that unanimous consent that those be made a part of the record.
Without objection.
And I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Thank you.